Hello, this is Raquel from the Learning Center, and today's Student Success Workshop is on note-taking. So if you haven't attended one of these workshops so far, you haven't met me. My name is Raquel Lado, and I'm a learning strategist at Algoma U. I provide academic support to students, which could take the form of learning strategy support, one-on-one individualized sessions, and I also coordinate our peer tutoring program. So just a reminder that every student at Algoma U can access 6 hours of free tutoring per course per semester. How do you get a hold of me? The easiest way is to just send me an email. You can email learning@algomau.ca or you can email me directly at raquel.lado@algomau.ca. The next slide contains a video of me introducing the topic of note-taking, and I'll meet you on the other side of that. Hi everybody, it's Raquel from the Learning Center with another Student Success video. This one today is on note-taking. So there's a lot of students that seem to think, I don't need to take notes, I'm going to get a copy of the PowerPoint after. And they're right that they will get a copy of the PowerPoint after, but they're sort of wrong in thinking that they don't need to take notes. So note-taking isn't about copying the PowerPoint slide, it's about capturing the extra information. So for example, the slide might have a new term or a definition on it, and then the professor is going to talk and give you extra details, going to go through some examples about this term, and verbally give you a lot more information about it to help you have a full understanding of the concept. So your job in class as a note taker is to capture the extra information that isn't on the PowerPoint. So at the end of it, you have a complete set of notes. You have the PowerPoint slides, and then you have your notes which captured all the extra information the professor shared. And you're going to use that information to help with your studying and to help with assignments. So you do need to be note-taking. So this little workshop I'm going to do today, we're going to talk about some strategies on note-taking, how to make you a little bit faster, how to be more efficient. So at the end of it, you do have a great set of notes. So thanks for tuning in, and let's get started. So why are good listening and note-taking skills so important? Well, your notes are the only link to what is said in the lecture, which means they should become a very important study tool. Many professors base their exam questions on information they've provided in the lecture. But taking notes in class and listening also helps you with remembering information, and it keeps you active and engaged in class. I like to say that taking notes gives you a job. When you have a job to do in class, you're more apt to actually pay attention instead of just sitting there listening and then zoning out. So let's take a minute just to talk about listening. Active listening means hearing and understanding. And in order to do that, you really do have to pay attention and concentrate on the speaker. It's difficult to listen and pay attention to more than one thing at a time. So if you're losing focus in class and you start listening to a little conversation going on beside you, noise out in the hallway, anything else like that, what means is you've probably stopped listening to the professor and you're now missing important information. But effective listening also requires attending to your basic health needs, like hunger and sleep. Especially sleep. Sleep is so important. And if you're sleep deprived, it's going to be really, really challenging to maintain focus in a lecture. So prior to the lecture, what should you do? If you have watched my organization and reading workshops, I've probably already mentioned this to you, you need to do your required readings. Your course outline should have a reading schedule for the semester that will tell you for every week what you're expected to read. The idea is that you've done that reading before you go to that class. Why? Well, it makes the material more familiar, so you're not hearing it for the first time, which means it increases your understanding of the lecture. Therefore, you are better at identifying the main points. It helps you remember information. We need to be exposed to information a lot of times, and also in a variety of formats for us to really remember and process it. So the more that we go through the material, the more that we will remember it. and it prepares you for discussions. This part is really important in those classes that do have class discussions and you get participation marks. You need to be prepared by doing the reading so you can contribute in a valuable way to the actual discussion. Immediately before the lecture, take a minute and review the notes from the previous lectures. What have we talked about in class before? Again, this helps you identify the main points, and it helps in retention of material, and it creates a mindset of being ready to learn and be focused on that class. This is especially important if the class is only once a week. If you had that class a full 7 days ago, you have probably forgotten the majority of what happened last week. So by taking a few minutes to go through the slides and your notes from the previous classes, it just brings you back up to speed again and gets you ready. All right, some note-taking strategies. Good note-taking does not mean writing everything because you don't need to and you don't have time. So you need to learn to distinguish what's important from unimportant. And that is a skill that improves with time and with exposure to a professor's style. Professors give you hints all the time about what is important. And it takes a little bit of getting used to a professor to start picking up on those hints. I had a professor that would ramble and he'd go off on examples and tangents and so on. And when he realized he was doing that and he was coming back to the important part of the lecture, he'd always say something like, "Okay, let's get back to it." So I knew that when he said something like that phrase, it meant he's going to go into the important things again. He's back from his tangent or wherever he was. So they're giving you clues all the time. When you're taking notes, an important thing to remember is that notes should contain points only. We don't want full sentences. The idea is to capture the most amount of information with the least amount of words. So let's look at an example. These two boxes contain identical information about magnesium. One of them is in full sentences and one of them is in point form. The one with the full sentences is obviously more cumbersome to read. It would be a lot longer to write out. The one with the points is really just the bare bones. What is the most important piece of information? And do I have it? I've also, though, you'll notice, used some abbreviations, which I'm going to talk more about in a few slides. But one of the ways that you can make yourself faster and more efficient is to use abbreviations. So the word important, I didn't write out the word important. I put IMPT as my short form. Regulation, I did reg apostrophe N. Veggies, vegetables, I put veg. So wherever you can, using an abbreviation can speed you up. So we can see that the point form is a lot easier to read, it's faster to write, but also what's really important is it's easier to study. If I'm studying this because I think I have a short answer question on magnesium, this is much easier for me to study and process and remember. And I can use the numbers to help me. I can use that as a trigger. There's 4 dietary sources, 4 sources. What are those? So that number 4 can act as a trigger for me. So some other strategies. Listen for the cue words. So things like definitions, dates, concepts. Whenever you get a list, there are 3 types of. Anything that is a list, you need to make sure you have every part of that list written down. Words like advantages and disadvantages, because that turns into a really good short essay question, right? List the advantages of this and the disadvantages. Words like reasons, there's reasons why we're doing something. These are the reasons why. Types, examples to summarize. Pay attention for repetition of ideas. So the more time spent on something, the more important it is. So if a professor says like 3 times one thing, obviously that's important. You need to make sure that you've captured that information. And the professor's body language. If they've been fairly monotone and all of a sudden they get excited and their voice changes or they start moving around, that's a signal that the information is important to them. And if information is important to them, there is a very good chance it's going to show up on a test. So in your notes, you're making sure you're capturing that, but you're also maybe using a symbol like a star. And the star means, I'm pretty sure this will be on the test. So then when you're going through your notes later, anything where you have put a star at that moment, you know you need to spend time studying. So a strategy when you have the PowerPoint. So in my little introductory video, I explained that yes, you always get a copy of the PowerPoint, but your job is to get down the extra information. So what can you do? You don't need to copy down the slides. You're going to get them. So your notes could take the format of S1, which equals slide 1, but we're using a short form. Maybe a few brief words from the title, and then you write down the extra information. And then the next slide comes up, you write S2, brief title, and then the extra information. Now, you can handwrite your notes, you can type your notes. That choice is completely up to you, as long as you are, how am I going to say this, efficient at it. If you are a horrible typer and are very slow with 2 fingers hunting and pecking for letters, then maybe that's not the most efficient for you. Maybe you're actually faster to write them by hand. If, however, you're very slow at handwriting, maybe it's really, really messy and you're better at typing, then typing will be more efficient for you. So I don't have a right or a wrong here. It really is a personal preference. But no matter whether you handwrite or you type, this strategy works fine. S1, brief title, extra information, slide 2, and so on. And then at the end, you are going to have notes on every slide that correspond with the actual slideshow that the professor is providing. Now, I mentioned abbreviations earlier. So when we're taking notes, we really want to be fast. We want to be efficient and effective, but we do want to have some speed, because you don't want to spend so much time writing and being so slow at it that the professor's now on to another slide and you're still on the first one. So one of the things you can do, as I mentioned, is use abbreviations. We use abbreviations all the time. You use them when you're texting, you use them in emails. They're just something that we've really adopted as part of our culture. And so we can take the same premise and put that into our note-taking. But when you develop a system of abbreviations, you need to be consistent with it. So the same abbreviation means the same word every single time. And you want to leave enough of the word so that you can actually recognize it later. There's nothing worse than going back to your notes and looking at it and going, I have no idea what I wrote here. So you want to make sure that you can recognize it, let's say 2 or 3 weeks down the road when you start studying for a midterm. So let's look at some common abbreviations and symbols. I actually like using symbols in my note-taking as well, because that can really speed up the process. So for example, I would never write the word money. I would just use a money symbol. I like using the arrows for increase and decrease. The less than and more than sign, the equal sign, which you've already seen me use in my slides. So some of these are just very common ones that most people are going to use. And then on the second column, right at the top, I've got psychology, psychologist, and psychological. So you're in a psych class, right? Okay. If you were just to use the first syllable of the word, psych, then you would be using psych for all 3 of these words, which are different. So we can use the apostrophe and the last letter to signify the different words. So for psychology, yes, we can use psych. And you don't even need the H if you want. You can drop the H too. Just use PSYC, or even PSY would work. But for psychologist, I'm going to use that first symbol, an apostrophe, and a T. So I keep that last letter so I can see the difference. And then psychological, I would do the same thing, but with the letter L. So this is a good example of you want to have enough of the word so that you can recognize it later. So now let's look at an example. All right, up arrow, EXER equals down arrow BP. So what does this mean? The arrows signify an increase and a decrease. So the first arrow is an increase in something. EXER stands for exercise. It's the first syllable of the word exercise. And I've got an equal sign, which here is actually representing something like leads to. And then I've got a decrease, and BP stands for blood pressure. So what this represents is an increase in exercise can lead to a decrease in blood pressure. So this is a really good example of using abbreviations and symbols together to capture a lot of information in a way that I can write very quickly. But this also takes some really good mental lifting and processing for me to listen to the professor who's speaking hopefully in full sentences, to shorten it down to the bare bones of what it represents, and then taking it to the next level, which is where can I put a symbol or an abbreviation. If I can do this, then that means I have really processed the information the prof is giving me. And that's what I want. But if I'm just sitting there, not taking a note, kind of listening, I'm not really processing anything, which means I'm not going to remember anything. So note-taking after class. Fill in anything you missed. So let's say you blanked out for a while, because it happens, and you caught yourself. Put a question mark in your notes. That's to signify you blanked out, and just start wherever the prof is. Afterwards, even before you leave the class maybe, say to the person sitting beside you, can you go back to this? I totally blanked out. Was there anything important here? Or you can maybe look in your textbook or something else. Another really important thing after class with your notes is identify possible exam questions. So I gave you the hint of putting a star beside the slides in your notes that you think are going to be test questions based on what the professor has said, based on the professor repeating it, based on the professor even saying, this might be a good test question, right? So you should have those stars in your book. And then review your notes periodically, ideally every week. So before the class, go through the notes. What did we do last week? Have a look and see, and it brings those memories sort of back up to the surface. So benefits of regular review. Why relearn everything? With no reviews, you'll have to relearn the material after a month. So this little chart here, we go from 25%, 50%, 75%, 100% of information remembered. Along the bottom, we have increments of time, starting with 30 minutes. 30 minutes, an hour, 12 hours a day, 10 days, and a month. So as time goes on, if we don't review, we lose the amount of information we've remembered very rapidly. In fact, 30 minutes from walking out of class, you have forgotten, I'm going to say about 60 to 65%. You're only going to remember 60 to 65% of the information. That's just within 30 minutes. But in 1 hour, you're about half. So by an hour after class, you've forgotten half of that information. However, if you review those notes every single week, you can bring that right back up to the top, and then the drop is much smaller. So by the time you go to study for the midterm or the final exam, with regular review, you don't actually have to study that much because that information is going to be regularly retrieved and you're going to remember it. So it's actually going to reduce the amount of time you spend studying. Should you rewrite your notes? I hear a lot about students rewriting their notes. If you're only rewriting them to make them neater, no, that has no value and nobody cares if your notes are neat. If you're writing them to condense, to make study notes, you're summarizing, you're paraphrasing, you're putting in examples, you're identifying the exam questions and answering them. If you're actually working with the material and processing it, then that does have a lot of value. But don't spend time just making them neat. So common note-taking errors: crowding, Leave space so that you can go back in case you miss something. Trying to write everything, you just physically can't do it. So you've really got to pay attention to what is important and what isn't. Now, not differentiating ideas. This one I haven't really talked a lot about, but I've said to sort of do your notes on a slide by slide basis. So if each slide is on one idea only, you're good. If, however, the slides have like more than one idea, make sure you differentiate that. Okay, underline it, put a box around it, make it bold if you're on the laptop, whatever, so that you can see how see the information and how it relates to each idea. Allowing yourself to lose focus and become distracted. If it happens, flag it with a question mark right away and pick up where you are. And then after, fill in the missing information. If you handwrite your notes, they often get lost. Make sure that you're keeping them together in a spiral notebook or a binder or just somewhere that you're going to have them after. One of the benefits, of course, to using the laptop is that you're going to have the notes and then can't read it later. It's either too messy or there's too many abbreviations. So your notes don't need to be neat. In fact, I would encourage them to be messy because messy implies some speed. But there is a limit. If they're so messy that you can't read it after, then there's no value to you. So you sort of have to find the right pace for you where you're fast enough, maybe sacrificing a bit of the neatness, but you can still read them after. So thanks for tuning in. I'm done. I am here to help if you would like some more assistance with note taking. We can look at your notes, we can go over and see what you're doing, and I can give you suggestions on how you can improve. Just a reminder, you can always contact me via email, learning@algomau.ca or raquel.lado@algomau.ca. So I wish you good luck with your note taking, and I hope I see you in the next Student Success video.